trouble. Better carry these laws, statutes and commandments. What you gonna do? In time of trouble. Judgment's yeah. What you gonna do? Yeah. Judgment's yeah. In time of trouble, yeah. What you gonna do? Yeah. What now? What you gonna do? In time of trouble. Judgment's yeah. You better be yeah. Judgment's yeah. In time of trouble.
Shalom. Welcome to the room. Welcome to thy kingdom come. First, I want to give all praises to Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai. Shout out to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Greetings and blessings. Welcome to tonight's lesson of Jacob's Trouble. Over the past 18 lessons of Jacob's Trouble, we have covered everything from what is Jacob's Trouble, what does the Bible say about Jacob's Trouble, how to navigate our way through Jacob's Trouble first, by making sure that we are covered in the spirit, we're keeping the law, statutes, and commandments, and having faith in the Messiah. We've covered cyber attacks, power outages. We've covered bug out bags, food storage, food rotation, intro to starting a garden. We've covered different skills that will be beneficial, sewing, fire making, hunting, personal protection, being a gray man. And also we've covered various TV shows and movies and extrapolated various lessons that we all could learn as we navigate Jacob's Trouble. So tonight, welcome to episode 19 of Jacob's Trouble. Now, with this one, it's a little bit different because we are dealing with religious exemptions and how yours got denied. Even with Jacob's Trouble, or some, the Edomites call it shit hits the fan. There are also, you have the big apocalyptic disasters, and then you have your day-to-day emergencies, flat tire, someone gets sick, things like that. So as of now, as we are in the beginning stages, some people say we're farther in, but dealing with Jacob's Trouble, a lot of our jobs are in peril because of this vaccine and the agenda behind it, that now all of a sudden, if you want to keep your job, you must get vaccinated. So while traditionally that was never the case, some companies had a flu vaccine mandate, but it was few and far between. So what are we going to cover with religious exemptions? I work at a law firm, and I just completed a training that some other law firms are giving to other law firms and companies on navigating through the religious accommodations. We're not going to deal with medical because that's a whole other animal. You need a note from a doctor and things like that. So I don't. That's not the prevailing accommodation as everyone's requesting. So we've seen a spike in religious accommodations. So the training that I went through the past couple of days, took it through the eyes. It's geared towards the employer. So this is the first training I had was 100% the employer. They did not care what the employee thought or cared, what their religious belief was. They were just telling the employers, this is how you stay out of court, and this is how you navigate these exemptions, and how to encourage your employees to get vaccinated. This one is the other training, the most recent one that we're going to cover tonight, is dealing with the religious accommodations and what employers need to look out for, and deny it or accept it, things like that. So you're getting a behind the scenes look at when you draft your religious exemption. What the employer is looking for in your religious exemption, and the language that you need to make sure that you have, because they can deny it based on something you said or didn't say, or they can ask more questions, and it kind of gets you into a trap and things like that. So this is the point of view that you're going to be hearing this training video. So I have the training video. I'm not going to disclose the law firm because, we just need the information. We don't care who's talking. So I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to pause it at certain points to explain some things and to give some, through our point of view, through the employee's point of view, and say, okay, they said this is something that you need to be aware of, and this is what this means. So when you draft your religious exemption, every single word you put on there matters. They're going to be going through it line by line, definitely precept upon precept if you put some in there. Um, so be aware of that. And after that, I'm gonna go over my religious exemption that I submitted to my company. And whether I get it or not, it doesn't matter. All praises to the Most High either way. So we're gonna go through that now. Back in the day, when America was, I guess part of what the myth was about America, you could just say, "Screw you! It's against my religion. I'm not doing that," and pretty much everyone to back off. Those days are long gone. So religious accommodations in general were just like the medical exemptions. Few and far between that someone filed a religious accommodation to get around some type of requirement from work. Typically, you would, for us, if you keep the Saturday Sabbath, you would say, "Hey, I can't work. It's a Sabbath," and they knew, the employer would know, and they would either say yay or nay. It wasn't you had to fill out a form or things like that. So now it's gotten a lot more complicated, and a lot more things that they can do, that they can use against you to trip you up and say, "Haha, you did this. Your exemption is denied." So don't worry. We're going to go through it, and I'm going to break down all this stuff that they're talking about. So again, this is to help the employer, this training. But we're doing by Kingdom Come. We're doing this training to help you. Because when I said, for me, when I went through some of this training, I said, "Ooh, okay." So I had to go back to my religious accommodation request, or my religious exemption, and say, "Hey, I need to amend this," since they asked me some follow up questions. So I amended it, and I got it cleaned up. So what you can do. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And I know there's a sisters class coming up in an hour. Don't worry, this will be recorded. We have the replays on, so you can just listen to it later and skip through the parts that you missed. So let's go ahead and get started. And King Ben or Azrael or Mike, if it's too loud, just tap your mic and I'll adjust the audio. If it's too low, just let me know. Talk about what is a religious accommodation, what's required. So just starting with the basics, under Title VII and state laws, their employees sincerely. She cuts out a little bit, so that's not, don't worry about that. She'll cut out for a few seconds and then it'll come back in. Held religious belief, observance, and practice. So stay tuned, we'll talk about what that means in a bit. But basically what an accommodation is in this context allows an employee to continue to work at the company while still complying with their religious beliefs. So they don't have to choose between staying employed at their current employer and or complying with the religious belief. So some common accommodations, just typically with religious accommodations, include flexible scheduling, having certain days off, assignments, changes in job assignments and transfers. And then the last one, and really the one we're going to be focusing here on today, is modifying workplace practices, policies, or procedures. So let me read that again, because she did cut out, and it's a recording, so there's nothing we could do. So common accommodations include flexible scheduling, Salakia, which that's something we're all common to, asking for the Sabbath off. Voluntary substitutes or swaps of shifts and assignments, which that would go to the scheduling. Lateral transfers or changes in job assignment. And this is the one that mostly everyone is applying for their religious accommodation, is modifying workplace practices, policies, and procedures. So this is a thing that the employers are more concerned about, is the modifying the workplace practices. So let's continue. We're going to talk about in what case, if you have a mandatory vaccination policy, you have to make exceptions to that policy modify that policy for an employee who comes to you with a request for a religious accommodation. And it sounds fairly simple, kind of just
without more. But once you kind of try to apply it in practice, if you haven't yet, you'll see that it becomes a little bit more complicated than what it sounds. So let's just start with the basic. What is a religious belief? And this, tends to be this is part of the inquiry, whether what the employee is presenting is in fact a religious belief or practice or observance in and of itself. We'll talk about whether that belief is sincerely held, and then we'll also talk about, the undue hardship. But let's just focus one piece at a time here. And the first is kind of starting from the basics. What is a religious belief, practice, or observance? And the bottom line is, based on Title VII and the EEOC guidance on this issue, a religious belief is extremely broad. It's a belief that touches on ultimate concerns regarding life, purpose, death, humanity's place in the universe. It's a very, very, very broad definition of what a religious belief actually includes. And it's not just, it of course includes traditional organized religions that we think about, but it doesn't just include those. It can include religious beliefs that we've never heard of, that are uncommon, that not that many people practice, that's not part of a formal church or sect, that, like I said, only a very small number of people follow. And it can frankly seem illogical and unreasonable to us at certain times. But just because it may be a religious belief that we are unfamiliar with, or we've never heard of before, or we don't fully understand, or seem silly, for lack of a better phrase, doesn't mean that it's still not protected by Title VII. So I think that's part of where folks get into, where we see clients getting into some trouble, is they say, like, we've never heard of this before, or, how could this be a religious belief? They don't go to church every Sunday. And so, those are kind of, I think we all have kind of preconceived notions of how we view religion. And so we kind of have to set those aside when an employee comes to us and says, hey, I'm seeking a religious accommodation. Now, there are other parts that we have to evaluate in that request too. But whether it's a religious belief is typically one of those things that, without more is fairly standard just for the employee to assume that it is in fact a religious belief. Where we see this come up in the vaccination context is that, oftentimes people have said, oh, I'm an anti-vaxxer. Or, kind of throughout the pandemic, they've been very vocal about, they think, COVID-19 isn't real, or, they would never get a vaccination or vaccinate their kids or things like that. And so I think, this is where we see kind of the intersection of those views with these religious requests. And so a religious belief does not include a social view, a political view, economic philosophies, or mere personal preferences, or this idea of like personal conscience. So it really has to be kind of that, what we talked on before about, like, it has to touch on kind of your ultimate place in the world, your purpose, life, death, things like that, not just, being an anti-vaxxer without anything else. So that's really kind of the first part of the analysis. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael to talk about how do we know whether a religious belief is actually sincerely held.
Okay, so let me stop you right there to go over a little bit. So the religious belief, this is why Babylon is, going crazy about, people filing these, is because it's broad and it doesn't have to be an organized religion. So some people quoted that to me, my mom got hers denied because they said it's not an organized religion. I'm either thinking they're lying or they got a company that really does not know what's going on. But organized religion is not part of it. It may be part of the inquiry that they may ask, but it's not a requirement for you to get it approved. Okay, so she said a few things. Title VII, she said that a few times. Title VII is just it's in the Constitution. You're talking about the civil rights, or you can't discriminate against race, sex, religion, sexual orientation. So religion is, in Title VII. So part of that, they have to, give you a religious accommodation. We'll go into more of the analysis, but the religion is part of Title VII, so it's protected under the Constitution. So some wiggle room that we may give our employer to deny us is if in our request, some people have different requirements. My employer had what did they have? They had a questionnaire. So it was like 6 questions that they asked me. And then, I just took my essay that I pre drafted and just injected it into.
Is it me or did he cut?
It sounds like the same. I didn't. I heard him just stop. Leo, you there? He should be back. While the brother Leo's uh, coming back on, make sure everyone is following the moderators on the stage. Follow the Thy Kingdom Come. Nominate some people to become members to the club here. Let's see. I sent them a message.
Yeah, he should be back. I'm over here taking notes, man. This is good.
Khan. Right now, he's resetting. I believe he's resetting his app. Let's see. Hold on one second. All right. All right. So while the brother Leo is resetting his app,
Damn, Esau trying to come against the truth, man.
right? With the new features, they they had a brother Leo bringing out too much information. Give me 1 second.
Salakia family, the power went out in the entire block, so the internet cut out, and that rarely happens, if ever.
Yo, they going that far?
you
Damn, you're
know,
not gonna graduate.
you know.
Man, I'm sitting here going over it, and then the lights just cut off, and then I'm looking outside, it's dark, and then people are, So my niece is in the living room. I said, "What happened?" She said, "The power went out," and I said, "And from everybody?" She said, "Yeah, the whole street went out." So
Hey,
yeah, man.
Hey, yo,
hey,
Esau, you can't get away.
hey, Biden set the order.
God.
Biden set the order. He was like, "Yo, cut the power. Cut Brazil's power."
Wow, God.
Man,
They
man. Now
coming
my
up
boss
with
already,
you.
man, my manager, she already told me after I submitted my religious exemption, she was getting hell, and she just told me, "Hey, man, watch your back. They're coming for you." So not her. She's nice. She's on my side, but yeah, man, they're pissed about this. So let's continue. One thing I left off about the a potential. She mentioned it, and it's a good point that she brought it out. One thing that they can use in your religious exemption, or your essay or whatever you submit to trip you up is if you start including social, political, economic philosophies or mere personal preferences. So that's when it comes into you start talking about your religion and what is it specifically that says you shouldn't get the vaccine, and then you start talking about Alex Jones said, and my personal belief is, or my personal preference is. or my philosophy, when you start getting to that, anything outside of religion, or your religion, then that's when they're going to start using to say, hey, this is more personal than religious. So please be aware of that. So let's continue. Now, one thing you want to make sure that is inside your affidavit or your essay is, this is my sincerely held belief. Sincerely held belief is a legal term or legal language that's a part of the religious accommodation. So I put, it's my sincerely religious held belief that, and then I go into my essay. So let them know that you know what you're talking about. I've seen some pretty strange affidavits out there, and I'll cover that. To Hey, you probably should delete this language if you're going to submit this. It's not bad, but you should delete this language. Okay. So now we're going to go into the next section as what is considered sincerely held. Okay. So again, this is through the point of view of a law firm teaching the employer what to look out for on how to deny your religious exemption. It's not this benefits you by us giving you that their point of view and showing you what you need to make sure is inside your religious exemption and what is not in there. Okay. So they try to trip me up and I said, okay, I need to clear this up in the follow-up questions. So let's continue.
Thanks, Emily. And this is where it gets tricky. As Emily explained, something can qualify as religious belief, even if it seems illogical or unreasonable to others. A few years ago, for example, a court in Ohio found that veganism might even qualify as sincerely held religious belief. We've been getting a lot of calls from clients who are struggling with how to know if an employee has a sincerely held religious belief. Essentially, this comes down to the employee's credibility. Here's the bottom line. The EOC and most courts will typically assume an employee's stated religious belief is sincerely held. So there's no set evidence required to confirm a belief is sincerely held, such as a pastor's note, a personal essay, proof that the employee attends a house of worship. None of that is a requirement in order to have a belief that is sincerely held. Now, as I'll discuss on the next slide.
Okay, let me stop it right there because he's even on my end. His listening to it back, it's not that great. So the good thing for us, the employee, our religious, sincerely held religious belief is it can be wide as the sun is gray. I mean, as well as sky is blue. So and with that, there is it's usually generally accepted. Whatever you state your religious belief is, the court will accept it. Now they will look, there's ways to deny that based on your conduct and things you said in the past and things like that. But the the EEOC, that's the Opportunity, agency or whatever. Their guidance is generally presumed or easily established. So if you say I am a Muslim, that's it. If you say you're, Jewish, that's it. If you say I'm a Christian, that's it. Now, employers should not be in the business of trying to decide whether religious belief is held for proper reasons. Okay, so they don't get that. There's no set evidence that is required to determine if this belief is sincerely held. So you don't have to have a pastor's note. You don't have to have a proof of worship or a personal essay to say, this is proof that I wrote this essay in college about, communism, Christendom, and so this is proof that you don't have to provide that. Okay. If you do have a pastor's note or someone from your congregation, it's helpful, but you don't have to put that. And I personally wouldn't because again, it just gives them more things to look into, So, but we'll get into that later. So remember, the relevant standard is the sincerity of the belief, not the underlying religious assertion. So they can't say, "Oh, I never heard of Hebrew Israelitism." I'm sure they have, but they can't say that. Like it doesn't matter. What matters is you as the individual submitting. Well, it does matter on some other stuff, but in terms of whether or not this is a sincerely religious held belief, it doesn't matter if they are aware of that religion or that belief. What matters is them reading your essay or them reading your questionnaire that they ask you to fill out or your affidavit. Is this sincere? Okay, so for some of you, some of us who said, "Hey, I can't work on the Sabbath. Can I get the Sabbath off?" That track history will go in your favor because they can say, "Yeah, he did. He does not work, or she does not want to work Sabbaths or Saturdays or whatever, or they have that they said they needed off for the Passover, So that history um, is that track record will benefit you. So let's continue.
An employee acting inconsistently with his or her asserted religious belief can be a factor in evaluating the sincerity.
Okay, so let me stop right there. He goes into what I was just about to say. The inconsistency in that can be a factor in whether or not it's sincerely held. And if they think it's not sincerely held, they can deny it based on that ground. But it's a very high hurdle for them to jump, so they won't jump it. They won't attempt. So there's other hurdles that they can jump easily, but just be aware of that. And those hurdles that we're going to cover that they can jump easily, we can cover. We're going to cover that. Okay.
Individuals' beliefs and adherence to those beliefs may evolve over time. So a religious practice that does not appear consistently observed over time can certainly be sincerely held at a snapshot in time. And because the law protects a potentially infinite number of religious beliefs, companies should generally assume an employee's request for religious accommodation is based on a sincerely held religious belief. Now, does that mean an employer must always accept an employee's asserted religious belief is sincere? Not necessarily. Now, before the pandemic, many companies might have never questioned the sincerity of an employee's religious accommodation. So this is new territory for a lot of employers. The rule is, if the employer has an objective basis for questioning either the religious nature or the sincerity of the asserted belief, the employer would be justified in asking for additional supporting information. Here are some factors the EOC has given employers to use to determine if there is an objective basis to question the sincerity of an employee's request. Number one, whether the employee has behaved in a manner markedly inconsistent with the professed belief. For example, the employee was overheard last week arguing there's no such thing as religion, or all religious beliefs are dumb. Number two, whether the employee is seeking a particular desirable benefit that is likely to be sought for non-spiritual reasons. So, for example, an employee who requests not to work on Monday and Friday. Number three, whether...
Okay, so let me stop right there because so the name of this slide is how to legally question the sincerity of a religious belief. Okay, so again, this is from the benefit or from the point of view of helping the employer. So point number, this is the second point. It says whether the employee is seeking a particular desirable benefit that is likely to be sought for secular reasons or non-spiritual reasons. So you're saying, "Oh, I need Mondays and Fridays off." Like, there's nothing in that religion that says you need Mondays and Fridays off. But that's a secular benefit that they would be receiving if you accommodated, if the employer accommodated that. So within that, by you asking for Mondays and Fridays off, they get to ask more questions and then potentially say, this is BS. This is not a religion. This is not, a sincerely held belief. You're just trying to get some secular benefit. Okay. So let's continue.
Timing of the request is questionable. So, for example, the request follows an earlier request by the employee for the same benefit for a medical or other non-spiritual reason. Number 4, whether the employer otherwise has reason to believe the accommodation is not sought for religious reasons. So this is a sort of catch-all. Like, for example, 10 employees all simultaneously submit identical letters requesting a religious accommodation based on the exact same asserted religious belief. So these are some factors. Not one is controlling, and you don't necessarily need them all, but these are some factors to consider in whether or not the employer has an objective basis to question or challenge an asserted religious belief.
Okay, so one thing that the employer, now this is not saying the employer can deny it, but once you submit your religious belief, your exemption, based on what you write, of course, they get a right, they have a right to ask questions or further questions. Um, so one thing that could be suspicious is if everybody in here, we all work the same company, we have the exact same letter that says our religion says we should not be vaccinated. I mean, okay, that's pretty vague, and it's all for the exact same reason. So now they get to ask each of us individual questions about our religion if it's sincerely held. So that's just something to be aware of.
You may be wondering, is there a workaround? And I'll hand it over to my colleague Abby, and she's going to discuss the next step in the interactive process, which is whether the requested accommodation creates an undue hardship or could create an undue hardship on the company.
Okay, so this next section will be covering the undue hardship. This is where the employers are going to have a lot of wiggle room to deny our request. So this is part of your request is to tell them whatever accommodation you're requesting, because you have to you have to give a request of accommodation. So for instance, for mine, let's just go with mine. They asked me, what accommodation are you specifically requesting that we do? Okay. My reply was, my department has been working from home since the pandemic, almost 2 years. And recently, my entire department has been assigned to work from home permanently. So, I am requesting that we continue that policy, and I do not have to get the vaccine because I will not be around people, will not be around workers, coworkers, things like that. But they told me earlier that, yeah, you would need to get the vaccine because we might have some meetings and things like that. And since I started working here, we ever had any in-person meetings. Everything's been done online. Clients have been done. Everything's been done online. So for me we got to do meetings in person. Yeah, right. But that's what I'm requesting is the day-to-day operation, have me work from home. Okay, so I want to see, and the thing is, you don't want to give them too many concessions up front. They say, hey, what about when you have to come to the office? Or what about when we have these meetings? Then I'll say, oh, in that instance, this is what I'm requesting. And so you don't want to give up all your concessions up front. So, but this undue hardship is the hurdle that employers are going to say, that creates an undue hardship. I can't accommodate that. So let's get into what is an undue hardship and how to recognize it. And if depending on where you work, it may be extremely difficult for them to grant your religious exemption, and they will be able to use undue hardship. But let's just see.
Thank you, Michael. So under Title VII, which governs religious exemption requests from mandatory vaccine policies, which is what we're talking about today, an employer does not have to accommodate an employee's sincerely held religious belief or practice if doing so would impose an undue hardship on the employer's legitimate interests. There is a similar undue hardship threshold under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but the undue hardship threshold under Title VII is much lower. Under Title VII, employers can demonstrate an undue hardship if the requested accommodation would impose more than a de minimis cost on the employer. De minimis means just more than a minimal cost or burden, but there is no formal proof mandated by statute. By contrast, An undue hardship under the ADA requires a significant difficulty or expense and usually requires a medical expert's statement to prove the hardship.
So let me stop it right here. She compared and contrast Title VII with ADA. ADA is the American Disability Act. So that has nothing to do with us. We're under Title VII for religious exemption. So, the employer could say your request, it's not just a religious request, you're requesting accommodation. Um, your request is more than de minimis. De minimis is bare minimum. There's not a test that they can say, oh, this is de minimis. But I think some judges have said with that first case that, where they imposed de minimis, which just means the bare minimum, they imposed undue hardship. Okay. So with undue hardship, so for example, if you request the Sabbath off, okay, the manager can easily find someone else to work your shift. Okay, they'll be getting paid the same thing that you would be getting paid. It's just they're just taking over your shift. Now it would be an undue hardship, or it would be more than de minimis if the manager had no one else to work, and if he put in someone else in your place, he would have to pay them overtime. That that triggering of overtime, the employer can say, no, you have to work Saturday because I don't have anyone else. Everyone is already stretched over overtime. If I put someone in your place, it's going to trigger overtime for, Jack Smith. And that's, an undue hardship. So that's how they can deny it. Okay. So she goes into the ADA. The ADA is like, I'm in a wheelchair. I need you to create a completely different, elevator system for me, and that's going to cost $80,000. And the company's like, I don't know if we can accommodate that. That's different. So when she talks about the ADA, it really has nothing to do with us, unless of course you're disabled, and then I apologize. But Title VII is what the religious exemption is what the religious exemption covers. So, them giving you the Sabbath off and having everyone else work, or having someone else work your shift and then not trigger overtime, they can do that. So if they can do that, it won't be an undue hardship. So let's continue. But this is the hurdle that they're going to use to say, I can deny your request. It has nothing to do with us being Israelites. It has nothing to do with being Muslim. It has nothing to do with whatever. You create, by you requesting this accommodation, whether you're requesting weekly testing, whether you're requesting, whatever you're requesting, that creates an undue hardship for the company. Now, in my request, we're already working from home. You guys told us in July that we are permanently working from home. So there's no cost. There's no undue hardship on the company. Okay. But depending on your company in May, I'll still apply for it. I'll still do it. But in your essay or your application or whatever your questionnaire is, you have to make sure, like whatever accommodation you are stating, weekly testing or whatever, that this does not create an undue hardship for the company. So if they have been paying for weekly testing, you might want to concede to say, I will pay the testing, weekly testing, which we can do that for free. So I will pay for weekly testing, and say it like that or something like that. Okay. So let's continue.
The EEOC Compliance Manual lists several factors employers can consider in analyzing undue hardship. So some of these factors include whether the requested accommodation would diminish efficiency in other jobs, whether it would infringe on other employees' rights or benefits, whether it would impair workplace safety, and whether it would cause coworkers to carry the accommodated employee's share of potentially hazardous or burdensome work. So for these four, picture a situation where, much like many of our employers here, you've been working remotely for the past 18 months. And so everyone's been getting their work done from home. But now with increasing vaccinations and with lowering numbers, you'd like to get your employees back to work. And so you start off maybe light, and you have your vaccinated employees report to the office so that they can interact with customers in person. If you accommodate a person who does not want to get a vaccination and you have a policy of no one being in the office that is not vaccinated, then other employees would have to report to the office, maybe, in place of that employee who does not want to be vaccinated or cannot be vaccinated. And so that would kind of fall within infringing other employees' rights. They have to do now more work to accommodate this employee, or it could fall within causing coworkers to carry the accommodated employee's share of potentially, in this case, I'd say it's burdensome work, where they have to go into the office more often than this other employee because this other employee, this accommodated employee, is not vaccinated. Again, it could also fall within the impairing workplace safety because we can't, or maybe your company has decided that they won't allow non-vaccinated employees to come into the office. And so, again, it falls within multiple of these factors that employers can consider. Now, for this undue hardship analysis, the type of business is also relevant to the analysis. For example, if you have a healthcare setting.
Okay, so let me stop you right here for a sec. So some of the factors that employers can use to say, you created an undue hardship is if it would diminish the efficiency in the job that you have, it would infringe on other employers' rights or benefits, it would impair workplace safety, it would cause the coworkers to carry the accommodated employees' share of potential hazardous or burdensome work, or it would conflict with another law. So when they're looking at your accommodation that you're requesting based on your religion, they're going to go through this checklist that these lawyers are training them on and say, so and so would have to come in more, and that would create overtime. So when you request your accommodation, list out, this is especially what I'm asking for. This will not diminish my efficiency in my job. This will not create this will not infringe on anyone else's rights or benefits of my coworkers. This will not impair workplace safety. Things like that to let them know I know what I'm talking about. And this is not you have to have be a genius or whatever. This is just some companies are listening to this to this training and say, aha, that's how I can do it. That's how I can deny it. So, list out how that accommodation will not create an undue hardship. It's one thing to say it won't create an undue hardship, but then they go through this checklist and say, yeah, because you're dealing with dangerous materials and I need 10 people here and you working from home. I know it was fine and well, but now we're back in the plant and they have to pick up your slack and it could cause, you have to list how it wouldn't, whatever you're requesting, weekly testing, mask all the time, whatever. If the accommodation is weekly testing and mask, you could say we've already been doing this. Okay, so let's continue.
You have travel or hospitality or retail. In these industries, the employees are customer facing or they have to interact with the public. In those circumstances, there's a stronger basis for denying an accommodation in this case. So the type of business matters. What job the employee has matters, whether they can do their job remotely, etc. All of those things, all of those facts matter. And so this analysis is very much a fact-specific analysis. So in analyzing undue hardship, state and local laws may also need to be considered depending on the jurisdiction. For example, the undue hardship standard under New York state law requires a showing of significant expense or difficulty, which is the standard under the ADA. And so even though the federal standard requires more than de minimis, in New York, you'd have to follow the local law or the state law in that case and show significant expense or difficulty. Here, employers should establish a centralized procedure and document each step that's taken, including metrics that they rely on. And like I said, this is very fact specific and fact intensive. So employers will want to be consistent, where you have multiple employees with the same factual scenario, then you would want to apply your policy consistently for those employees. I should also note, as you know, the Delta variant and the case counts are decreasing, the facts can also change that form the basis of your analysis under this undue hardship threshold. And so it's possible that today it would form or it would impose an undue hardship on an employer to allow an exemption from the mandatory vaccine policy, but maybe in 6 months that would change. So employers should definitely keep that in mind, that the facts can change and the circumstances can change. So with that, now that we've talked about this exemption and whether you can allow an exemption under the hardship threshold, I'll toss it back to Emily to talk about religious accommodations in practice.
So the analysis for the undue hardship, they that analysis is fact based. It's not based on your personal belief. It's, you know, you're requesting them to provide or let you do whatever. And, you know, they will go through the facts and say, okay, this is going to cost us a lot of money. This is going to be difficult. This is, you know, it's going to inconvenience us a little bit. So it's fact based. It's not based on your religion. It's just, this is what this person is requesting. And this will create an undue hardship. So let's give we gave the Sabbath example. Another example would be, we have the Muslims, you know, they pray 5 times a day. So one request that they gave, and of course the company's bent over backwards after 9/11. You know, they were scared to offend anybody. They requested a prayer room, or just a room designated for them to go and do their prayers. The company said, yeah, we got a, you know, storage room. We can move some stuff around. It's not going to cost us. It's not going to be a problem. Therefore, we met your religious accommodation. So something like that is the facts. You know, it has nothing to do with it's based on the religion, but I need a room for a few minutes to pray. And the company can look at the facts and say, yes, we have an extra room that we can move some stuff out, or this is a conference room, and, you know, during this time it's not booked, so you can go in there, pray or whatever. So that accommodation for the Muslims during that time, or even now, because it still goes on, is a real easy threshold for them to factually. It's real easy for them to accommodate. Okay, so that just gives you, like, it's factual based. It's not, you know, well, it's against my religion, you know, to working with people. You can't say that. So now we're going to look at what does religious accommodations look like in the actual workplace. I gave a few examples, but they're going to go over it, and there's some things to consider.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. And I think just to kind of, before we move on, we're going to cover some case law, and we're not going to spend too much time on it for a couple of reasons. One, there's not too many cases dealing with the COVID vaccine and religious accommodations quite yet. And then two, you know, we want to kind of get to some hypotheticals and make sure we have time to answer your questions. But I do want to just to make sure we're proceeding kind of all on the same page here. So really, it's kind of a two-step inquiry when you get a religious accommodation request. The first is, you know, is the request, or, you know, is the request based on a sincerely held religious belief? And as Michael talked about, you know, really that inquiry should not be too detailed. Most of the time you can just accept that it is going to be sincere unless you have specific reasons to believe that it's not. And that's a real challenge to question the sincerity of someone's religious belief, because unlike, you know, a medical request or, you know, a disability accommodation where you have a note from a doctor, here you're really trying to kind of get to the heart of somebody and their beliefs, and that's not always easily proven by documents, right? So it can be tricky. And so the EEOC guidance, as Michael said, basically says you should pretty much assume that it's sincerely held unless you have reason to believe otherwise. And then once you so that should be a fairly quick analysis or step, hopefully, in most cases. Then you kind of move to the step that Abby talked about, which is really analyzing the undue hardship. And under Title VII, setting aside most laws, that's really where employers have the most essentially flexibility in denying accommodation requests, is relying on that undue hardship. I would much rather be in court arguing that the request posed an undue hardship for the company rather than arguing the sincerity of an employee's religious belief. So with that, we'll move to some case law.
So what the last thing she said is key. I would rather argue undue hardship than the religious sincerity, the personal sincerity of their religious beliefs. So that undue hardship is what they're going to use the most, because it's almost impossible to say this is not sincerely, especially for us in the truth who've been working or requesting Sabbaths off, or telling them, hey, I can work Saturday night after the Sabbath and things like that. So um, you know, but I'm sure they're going to look at my Saturday history that they asked me to work, and I got an answer for that. So, they're going to do that. But it's easier for them to say this is undue. This is an undue hardship for the company if we accommodate it. It's a lot easier for them. But let's look at some accommodations that have been actually in practice. Like, what would that look like?
Kind of give you an idea of where things currently stand. So there's two cases that are obviously very recent that have upheld mandatory vaccination policies. And as you'll see, I'm not going to go through great detail on these, but as you'll see, what really was the ultimate deciding factor here for the court was that the policies provided for an exception for religious or medical accommodation. So if you just have a blanket policy that you have to get vaccinated, there's no exceptions to the policy whatsoever, that's going to be likely not upheld. But here, let's start with the first example, first case out of New York. And this case is pending appeal. It has been in the news quite a bit, but it's a challenge a lot based on a constitutional basis, but it's a challenge to New York's vaccine mandate for all public school employees to be vaccinated. The policy itself provides for religious exemption, and the lawsuit was brought by a group of teachers who sought to enjoin the policy so that it couldn't be enforced. And the court basically said, look, many of the teachers who are plaintiffs have received an exception to the policy based on their religious beliefs. And, because the policy provides for this exemption, the court used the phrase, there's not even a whiff of animus toward religious beliefs. So as of right now, the policy is permitted, and employees, public school employees who have an issue with it and who want an accommodation based on religion have the ability to ask for one.
So just a quick recap. There's a case in New York. It's pending appeal. A group of teachers, they wanted to do away with the mandate for New York public school teachers to get vaccinated. But the problem is the schools, or in New York City, you can apply for the religious exemption. So some of these teachers have already applied and got the religious accommodation. So this case was dismissed, or not dismissed. The injunction was dismissed, and now it's on appeal. Oh gosh, Salakia. The case was. Say
Oh
what?
no, I just thought no, Slocky. I yield.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, interesting night. So there was a where was I? Okay, so they some of these teachers got the religious exemption. But they were trying to put an injunction to say, this was an invalid mandate. But the courts, said, your injunction is denied because some of you have applied for the religious exemption. New York City allows for religious exemption, and some of you have even gotten it. So this is ridiculous. So it's pending on appeal. This was filed like a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago. So for you to just do an injunction because you don't want the mandate, and if they give you a way to get the exemption, you would have to seek the exemption. Okay, so here's another case.
The second case is out of Kentucky. Similar scenario here. We had a healthcare company adopt a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy. A number of workers requested a preliminary injunction, requesting that the policy not be allowed to be enforced. And the court evaluated, it was on a number of factors, but on the religious side, evaluated how many religious requests had already been, or accommodation requests had already been granted. And the employer presented evidence that it had already granted 47% of religious exemption requests, and also had I think 30% or 39% were still pending, and they had only denied a very small number of religious requests. And so the court said, listen, we're upholding the mandatory vaccination policy because the employer is doing what it should be doing, and it's evaluating these religious accommodation and medical accommodation requests under the policy and under Title VII and the ADA. So with that, I'll turn it over to Abby to talk about some of the court cases that have found that mandatory vaccination policies cannot be upheld.
So just as Emily, thank you, Emily. So just as Emily stated, when a vaccine policy does not allow for a religious accommodation, then those are the cases where we're finding that the court will block the mandatory vaccine policy. So in keeping with that, we have the first case, Dr. A versus Hochul out of New York. This is, again, another recent case. In this case, the New York State Department of Health issued a regulation requiring most healthcare workers to be vaccinated without an option for a religious exemption. So 17 medical workers sought an injunction. They opposed taking the vaccine or the different vaccines due to the vaccine's connections to aborted fetal cell lines, which is probably something a lot of you have heard in this context. Here, the court enjoined the vaccine mandate because it did not provide an option for requesting a religious exemption.
Okay, so let's stop right here. This was another case in New York. The lawyers in New York are busy. So this was the New York Health Department, and they said every healthcare worker has to get vaccinated, but they did not give them the option for religious exemption versus the state of, the New York Public Schools gave an option for religious exemption. So the court upheld their the injunction, so that this New York Department of Health lost that as of now. They lost because they did not provide a way for religious exemptions. And then part of that, one of the statements that these health medical workers put in their request, they said opposed taking the shots due to the vaccine's connection to aborted fetal cells. There's going to be some more language, that they're going to discuss later on in this video about you putting that type of language in your essay. Let's call it an essay. In your essay or in your request. Well, I think it's connected to aborted fetal cells. Okay, they can use that to open a door of can worms to say, aha, this is not religion, this is personal, or this is political. But it's not, they can do it just to make it difficult for you. But in the end, they're going to go the route of undue hardship. Undue hardship will be that ace of spades that they're going to be slamming on the table, or the big joker they're going to be slamming on the table. So that's the one we have to be worried about. But this is just giving you what's the landscape looking like, and as everyone is fighting this, not everyone, but those who have eyes to see. So the health department is different from the public schools because the health department did not provide an option for religious exemptions, but the New York public schools did. So the judge in this case said, okay, yes, I'm stopping the mandate for vaccines for the New York Health Department because you guys need to open a way for them to apply for religious exemptions. Okay, so let's look at another case.
Life in Zambrano versus United Airlines, also from very recently, and this time out of Texas. The airline began a blanket policy of putting any public-facing workers on unpaid leave indefinitely if they have a religious or medical reason for not being inoculated. The judge here issued a temporary restraining order. In this case, it's still ongoing. Here, the order prevented United from carrying out the program until at least October 26th, again, because there was no religious exemption in this policy or medical exemption here. Like I said, this case is ongoing, and so an evidentiary hearing was held on October 13th, but there are still further court hearings and motions, so we should probably hear something soon in this case. So with that, we've talked about the inner workings of religious accommodations, and whether you can grant them or whether they impose an undue hardship on you as an employer. So let's talk a little bit about some hypotheticals so that we can see this more in practice. So the first hypothetical.
So what they're about to do now is go over some hypotheticals. So such and such applied for this, and they said this. What do you do? So again, they're training the employers on how to respond to our request. So this is hypothetical number one.
Dawn is a practicing Catholic and has continuously reiterated she believes the response to COVID has been overblown. She orally submits a request for a religious accommodation and states that her religion does not approve of the vaccine because of the use of fetal cell lines. You are aware that the Pope has endorsed vaccines for all Catholics. How do you respond? Emily, I'll let you take this.
So for those, if it was a little choppy, Yvonne is a practicing Catholic and has continuously reiterated she believes the response to COVID has been overblown. She orally submits a request for religious accommodation. I would put it in writing. And she states her religion does not approve of the vaccine because of the use of fetal cell lines. You, the employer, are aware that the Pope has endorsed vaccines for all Catholics. How do you respond?
Sure. So I'm kind of chuckling a little bit because, as Abby kind of teed up, this is actually one of the more common questions or common religious accommodation requests that we've seen here over the last, few months. And just as an aside real quick, and then I promise I'll answer the hypo, I was telling a client that I think over the last, 14 years that I've been practicing, I had handled maybe a handful of religious accommodation requests. And I think over the last 2 months, I've handled many, many, many more than that. So it's interesting how quickly this has become an issue, essentially overnight. So you're not alone if you're experiencing it, one. But two, this particular hypothetical that's posed with respect to a Catholic employee raising or other religious basis too, raising the fetal cell line argument. And so the question is, how do you respond to this request? And so the first is, I would say, this employee, Yvonne, has orally submitted a request. So I would always recommend having the religious requests for accommodation be put in writing. That way it tracks kind of their particular view. You have documentation of it. With anything like this where you're getting an exception to the policy, I think documenting is key. So first I would say she should submit her request in writing. And to that end, I would suggest all employers, if you don't already, have some type of accommodation form that's actually been tailored to the COVID-19 vaccine that talks about seeking an exemption from the mandatory vaccination policy, or if you don't have a mandatory vaccination policy, if there's some incentive or something like that the form could apply to. So first I would say, Yvonne should fill out the required template form to request an accommodation, and then the company can evaluate that request. And, I would say, with respect to the point about, she's kind of stated it all along that the response to COVID has been overblown. I think that could give the employer potentially a reason to question the objective nature of the sincerity of her belief. Now, some employers say, we're not going down that road. Two things can be true. She can think the vaccine, the response has been overblown, but she also has a religious, a sincerely held religious belief. And so we're going to, we'll just move to the next step about evaluating whether it's an undue hardship. And then others say,
Yeah, forgive that feedbacks. One of these attorneys have their mic unmuted, so it's giving some feedback on the other attorney's end. So that has nothing to do with the audio or Clubhouse. So it'll stop it up a little bit, and I'll explain it if it's when it's done what was said.
Well, now, since she's acted inconsistently before, by not talking about her religion and not talking about her opposition to the use of fetal cell lines, we're going to ask her for some additional information. And so I think that would be fair here if you wanted to go down that path, and you could ask her for additional documentation. Now, as we've talked about, getting that documentation sometimes leaves employers feeling like they want more because you're not going to get that signed note from a doctor. You could ask a pastor or somebody or, religious leader at the church to sign something, but, maybe the person doesn't attend church. And the EEOC basically says, that's not necessarily the first step the employer should take when challenging the sincerity of the religious belief. So you want to be careful with those types of requests. But what we have seen some employers do is flesh those religious beliefs out a little bit and ask people, when did you first start practicing your religion? What are your religious beliefs? And the note here that there's a difference between an employee saying, I don't want to get the vaccine because of my religion, and an employee saying, I'm not comfortable with getting the vaccine because it was created with or developed, or tested on aborted fetal tissues. And by taking that, I feel like I'm condoning abortion and I value the lives of unborn children. And, that's against my religion. And so the latter is clearly a more well-articulated argument about somebody's religious beliefs. And so if you get an employee that just says it's taking a vaccine is against my religion, you could press for more information about how it actually imposes on the vaccine mandate would impose on their religious beliefs and get some more information about what those beliefs are. So I think once you get to that standpoint and you're comfortable with the sincerity of it, you can then analyze it under the undue hardship rubric, Abby, that you discussed previously. Now, just one quick note. It talks about how the employer is aware that the Pope has endorsed vaccines for Catholics. And so, for a while, we had a lot of clients saying, okay, fine, you don't have to get the J&J vaccine, but, you have to get Moderna or Pfizer. And, that really, even though the Pope has said, and, the church has come out saying, their view is that kind of given the severity of the pandemic, while the vaccine is not, perfect, people should do it to protect others. An employee can have different views from church leadership. And that's true of every religion. It's not just Catholics, obviously, and what the Pope says. But employees don't have to be in line exactly with what the religious leaders say or the tenets of the religion. And so you may know that your employee doesn't go to church every Sunday, or, fill in the blank of whatever your view of an employee being religious means. They could be the worst Catholic ever, never attend Mass, never have been confirmed, etc., never have stepped foot into a Catholic church, but they feel that they're a Catholic and they could still meet, the sincerely held beliefs. And so just because the Pope has endorsed the use of these vaccines for Catholics doesn't mean that an employee has to share those same views. Now, what we have seen some employers do on this point is to, in a delicate way, ask the employee if they're familiar with the Pope's view and say, are you aware that the Pope has actually said it's okay for you to get this vaccine, and that, while it's not perfect, it doesn't mean that you're approving abortion by taking a vaccination that may have been tested on fetal cell lines. And some employees, I think the response most of the time is, yes, I know and I don't care. But some employees, it makes them think a little bit. And, usually it doesn't change their mind, but it puts a seed in there that maybe they could consider taking it. So it's really kind of your workplace better than we do in your workforce, and so maybe kind of pushing on that point would be well received, and maybe you would just make a lot of employees mad if you were to do that, and so it's kind of balancing that. So that's how I would respond in that case.
Thank you, Emily. So, Michael, do you have anything to add on this?
No, I think that's a great recap. I mean, ultimately, this comes down to risk tolerance. And so risk-averse companies might want to, just accept unasserted religious belief on its face and not want to get into the weeds on that. And just go directly to the undue hardship analysis. More risk-tolerant companies, especially those who want to send a strong message to their workforce, might be a little bit more distrustful of the asserted beliefs and be more willing to challenge those and ask the deeper questions. As Emily explained earlier, if we were in court, I'd much rather be defending an undue hardship decision than trying to convince a judge or jury that the employee was not sincere in their belief. I mean, trying to prove a negative like that can be very difficult.
Con, so let's just do a quick recap. If you have put in your request that you do not approve of the vaccine because it uses fetal cells, it's the fact that it's crazy that they're talking about this so commonly. So I guess it's an open. It's not an open secret anymore. Everyone's like, yeah, whatever. I don't give a shit. So just putting that line. Because it's use of aborted fetal cells, you would have to put some precepts in there to kind of go into that. Do not give your children under the fire of Moloch. Go into how abortion is against your religion. I personally didn't put that, but again, and nor is it required to put that. But the fact that this woman's a Catholic, and she opened up herself to the scrutiny of the Pope, but it really doesn't matter because that's not you may differ from your leadership, but what the gentleman said is that it depends on your company whether they want to probe more in terms of, well, do you know about the fetal cells, and do you know what the Pope's comment are? If your company is like, F you, I'm about to make an example out of you, they may ask those additional questions. If they're like, yeah, fine, whatever. Let's deal with this undue hardship, hurdle that you have to jump. Then that's probably what they're going to go for. So opening up this door is it just depends on the company, but putting that is not bad. You just be aware you may have to answer additional questions regarding that statement you put. So whatever you put down will be used against you, so be prepared to defend it. And I got caught slipping on something, and it was ambiguous, so they said, did you mean this? Can you explain? And I was like, oh, that, let me clarify. I'm glad you said that. So it just depends on the company, but let's continue.
Thank you. So we actually have a question that was posed, and it's appropriate for now, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it, and maybe we can try to answer. So the question says, NPR has an example of an employer who asked if employees with a religious belief, because of the vaccine's relations to aborted fetal cell lines, asked the employees to attest to not using other medicines like Tylenol that also have a relationship to aborted fetal cells. Is that correct or prohibited by Title VII? What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I'm happy.
So real quick, NPR, they had a situation, or someone asked a question on the radio show, or something came up about an employer saying, "Oh, fetal cells, you want to use that line, but did you know that Tylenol uses aborted fetal cells too?" And so they're about to go discuss that.
Take a stab at this, and then Abby and Michael welcome your feedback too. So it's permitted. You can certainly, and we have prepared questionnaires, along these lines, basically, with a long list of medications that have been tested on fetal cells and asking the employees to attest, whether or not they've ever taken one of these medications before, and if they have, how that's different. I think it's a slippery slope, to be quite honest. I think it goes back to employee morale, and it should be no surprise that employees don't respond well to folks challenging their sincerely held religious beliefs. And so I think it's how you approach it. And a couple other things to note. One is approaching it on a consistent basis. So if you're going to ask that of certain individuals based on their accommodation requests, you should ask it of all individuals who pose that same objection. I don't like it. I think you can do it. This is my personal opinion. I don't like taking a religious request and then potentially expanding it into a medical issue, right? And so you may learn information about the employee through those questions that raise ADA issues, or you don't want to make a religious accommodation request then blossom into something bigger. So while it is permissible, it's not without risks. I do think there's benefits, though, right? I mean, it causes employees to question, their request. It makes them think twice about it. It shows them that you're on top of it and nothing's going to get past you. And one other thing that I'll mention on that particular point, too, is, interestingly, the Safer Workforce Task Force, say that 3 times fast, that has issued guidance for federal contractors, has actually included example forms for employers, for federal contractors to use for religious and medical exemptions. And interestingly, I was surprised to see that they had a similar line of questioning on their religious exemption form that basically said, have you taken any other medication that has been tested on aborted, fetal cell lines, and asking, if so, why was it permissible then? What's different about the vaccine? So, with that being said, the institution that's giving guidance to federal contractors has essentially blessed employers asking those questions. But again, it's not without risks. Abby, Michael, what did I miss on that one?
I would just say here that everyone should remember that the standard is the sincerity of the belief and not the underlying religious assertion. So it's possible that an employee could have taken Tylenol their entire lives and not known that it was tested on aborted fetal cell lines, and still have this sincerely held religious belief. And so it's really about the sincerity, and 2 things can be true at the same time. So I wouldn't think that this is a gotcha moment, and because they've ever taken Tylenol, you win. I think, like you said, Emily, that it probably will just have the effect of making that employee more steadfast in their beliefs, and as opposed to if you were to just bring it to their attention and not try to base your rejection on the fact that they've ever taken Tylenol in the past. So that's all I would add here. So I think we can move to the second. Oh, go ahead.
Real quick, another thing is that we discussed earlier is that a person's religious beliefs can evolve over time, and so whereas something that any of us believed 2 or 3 years ago might not be the same thing we believe now. And I think it's really important to emphasize too that if we're talking about a religious accommodation and then we're getting into all these potentially disability-related questions, we might be opening the door to more complex analysis under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there's also the issue of sometimes employers don't want to know the answers to certain questions because, maybe in trying to disprove the sincerity of the belief, they learn about an employee's medical history, and now the company's on notice of that and potentially raising risks of employment concerns under other laws.
Thank you. So we'll move to Hypo 2. So ABC Company issued a vaccine mandate that provides for requests for accommodation due to a disability or religious belief. Employee Edward submits a written religious accommodation request. It included words that did not sound like something Edward would say. For example, therapeutic proportionality. Holly, HR, was skeptical. She ran a Google search and found a form letter with the exact same language as Edward's letter. Can Holly deny the accommodation request based on that information alone, and should she? Michael, I'll throw this one to you.
Yeah, so just remember
So in this one, it's a very common one. Michael or Edward grabbed a religious accommodation request from Google and just wrote his name in there or did a copy and paste and submitted it. So the question is, can Holly deny the accommodation based on that information alone, or should she? So this is a common one, and they're going to get into the answer.
the employer must have an objective basis to question the sincerity of the belief. And it's deliberately unclear in this hypothetical whether HR's reason to question Edward's sincerity was objective, i.e. based on the wording of the letter, or subjective, that the suspicion was only raised once some Google research was done. And, that nuance right there is again not something that I would want to be defending in court, and that nuance might be something that could get a case past summary judgment. And again, this ultimately comes down to risk tolerance. A risk-adverse company might be willing to press a little bit harder, and risk-adverse companies might be not willing to press harder and just accept it on face value. Whereas risk-tolerant companies might be wanting to be more aggressive. And regarding specific fact pattern, it appears Holly does have a belief that there's something going on here. That said, she shouldn't just deny the accommodation requested on the spot. It's still a good idea to go through the interactive process and ask for additional supporting information, ask additional questions. Even if it's ultimately going to be denied, it's important to still go through the process, still treat these requests professionally and with respect. Even if it's a foregone conclusion, going through the process each time consistently will really help reduce risk. Anything you guys want to add?
I'll just add a couple of points and answer a couple of questions that I saw come in as well. I mean, I think that to your point, Michael, about addressing these consistently, it's really important because, the question was what happens if you don't deal with accommodation requests on a consistent basis. And the risk is that, somebody then has a different type of discrimination claim, or showing that, the way that you were handling the religious accommodation request was really just a pretext for discrimination. And so I think that, being consistent ensures that employees can't use it against you to say somehow you didn't follow the process that you had in place. And that's why it's really key that you have forms, that you have kind of a central team of people evaluating these requests. So, for example, in this hypothetical, a team could say, and we've had clients see these patterns, say all of these employees are submitting requests that have the same wording. And when we looked, we found a form letter that, that's available on Google that they've just cut and pasted. And so, kind of being able to have a group that's centralized, that's handling these requests in the same way will ensure that you don't open yourself up for dispute later. And I'll just say, too, with respect to, Michael was right on, basically saying you follow the same process, does this give you an objective basis? Maybe, probably, to follow up. Do you want to? That's another question. Especially if you just plan, if you want to deny it based on undue hardship, do you really want to get into this? But I will say too, putting on my plaintiff's attorney hat here for just a second, I would be more than happy to make an argument that the employee had a sincerely held religious belief, wasn't sure how best to articulate it, and wanted to be sure that she gave herself or he gave himself the best possible kind of put their best possible foot forward in getting the accommodation approved. So they sought help via Google to ensure that the company would consider their request. And I think that's fine. Doesn't mean that just because you had to get help from Google and wording your request doesn't necessarily mean that the belief is not sincere.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll move on to Hypo 3 for the sake of time. So employees at X Corporation worked remotely the past year. X Corporation has recently mandated vaccines and that employees return to the office to work in person. Raj has a sincerely held religious belief against the company vaccine mandate and knows of 3 other employees that had their work from home accommodations approved. Raj points out that his work from home accommodation request should be granted because those 3 other employees were exempt and the company knows he is just sufficient working from home as he is in the office. So can the company deny his requested accommodation? I'll throw that to you, Emily.
So the answer is it depends. How's that for a helpful legal?
So just in summary of this one is, and this is why if you work at a company, it's good to talk to other employees who are thinking about getting submitting their request, so you guys can talk amongst each other to see, did they deny yours? What was the reason? Did they grant yours? And what were the accommodations? And on the company's end, whether they approve or deny, they want to make sure they should make sure they treat everyone the same, because it could be a discrimination suit that the company will be facing, whether they deny it or approve it. So with this one, the guys, Raj is saying mine should have got approved because the other ones who submitted theirs got approved and they're working from home too. So, let's see, can the company deny his request?
Sure. So we kind of hear the hypo assumes that his belief is sincerely held. So we kind of just go to step 2 of the process, which is, does this accommodation to work from home that Raj has made, does it pose an undue hardship to the company? And so assuming this is, under Title VII, the analysis, does it create more than a de minimis cost to the employer? And so here, it really, the company may be able to deny it. You have to kind of dig in deeper about, the 2 other employees that have been able to work remotely. Is it because of a religious accommodation, or maybe they're working remotely because of a medical accommodation that they made under the ADA? And that analysis is different. The 2 employees may not have the same job duties or the same job title as Raj, and so it may be just fine for them to continue to work remotely. Whereas for Raj, depending upon what he does, it may be an undue hardship for him to continue working remotely based on his job duties. So that in and of itself is, just because you have other employees working remotely doesn't end the analysis in terms of the inquiry. And to the second point, the company knows he's just as efficient working from home as in the office. Raj may take that view, and the company may feel otherwise. The company may show that Raj's performance over the last 18 months has declined based on what it was before pandemic when he was in the office. And so there may be a business reason why he needs to come back to the office to improve his performance. So I will say, just generally, because most folks have been able to work remotely, over the last 18 months or so, it has put companies in a little bit of a bind in terms of saying working remotely is an undue hardship. It's a little bit more difficult now to make that argument, since presumably employees have successfully been doing it for quite a while. I will just say too, and this is a good point here to note, that a company doesn't have to give Raj the accommodation that he requests. If he says, I want to work remotely, the company could say, no, that presents an undue hardship, right? But you can come to the office, but you have to wear a mask, you have to socially distance, you have to do testing, etc. if you don't want to be vaccinated. So just because an employee comes to you with a particular religious accommodation request, you don't have to give them the accommodation requested, but you go through the interactive process, just like under the ADA, to figure out a potential accommodation that would work to where the employee didn't have to get vaccinated, but is still protecting and the employee is still able to do their job for you.
Thank you. So we're going to our last hypo. After Alpha Company announced its vaccine mandate, Harry submitted a medical exemption request. Alpha Company gave Harry documentation to submit to his doctor to support his medical request, but his doctor refused to complete it. So now Harry has submitted a religious exemption request without additional supporting information. How should the company handle the requested accommodation? What if he refuses to provide additional documentation? So I'll throw this to you, Michael.
Sure. And clearly the timing in the hypo is suspect. The suspicious timing is sufficient objective reason to request more information about the employee's asserted belief. The company may want to even ask why he did not initially submit his request based on the religious reasoning. And, some of these informational websites that are out there, let me back up, but, employees on the internet, employees who object to vaccine mandates are very resourceful, and there's websites out there that are specifically targeting that audience. And some of those informational websites sell forms, sell letters. They actually advise employees not to provide any information if the employer asks. So here, if the company asks Harry, okay, well, how long have you been holding this view, or what is it about your view that really you object to on a religious or moral grounds? Have you ever written a personal essay on this? That sort of thing. If Henry refuses to provide anything, if Henry just says, I object, you're invading my privacy, or whatever reason he has, yet the company is trying in good faith to engage in the interactive process, that's a reason to deny the accommodation. In that scenario, the breakdown in the process, in the interactive process, was caused by the employee. And if the employee doesn't participate, then that's a reason to deny the accommodation. It's important to remember that these are really hot button issues. And many employees who are both for or against vaccine mandates are very passionate, very emotional about it. Either way, these are the things that over Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, fights or arguments might break out even in the families. And the types of workers that sometimes file lawsuits are the ones who are very emotional or passionate about something that happened at work and feel that they get steamrolled by their employer. And so that's why it's important to be consistent in how these how the interactive process is applied, take all requests seriously and professionally. And as Emily explained, the company does not have to necessarily accept the requested accommodation, which is an exemption. Socially distance, testing, masks, maybe arranging so the employee can be in an office by themselves, potentially finding a non-customer facing role. So there's a lot of other options that employers can consider, and the courts are very clear that the employer does not have to accept the requested accommodation. They just need to provide a reasonable accommodation if the employer determines that no undue hardship exists. Okay, Patty?
Thank you. So I think those are our 4 hypos. I'll toss it to you, Emily, for takeaways.
Okay, so let me stop right there. They're almost finished. But with so if you tried to do the medical and then it got denied, or your doctor wouldn't, give it to you, which, as we covered in the news, doctors are starting to, there's starting to be a muzzle on doctors giving out medical exemptions. So if you try that route and then you did the religious, then that may, well, it's not may, it will open you up to some questions about, why did you request medical, but now you're doing religious? Why, that'll just open it up. So just prepared to answer. So whether in any case, we all are going to have to answer follow-up questions regarding what we submitted. Whether it's the accommodation, whether it's the sincerely, if it's, they might be probing to see if it's really sincerely held, or we just, pick some stuff up to say we're religious. either way, you're going to have to ask some follow-up questions. So whether or not that, don't think because I applied and I can't now apply for religious. No, go ahead and apply for it. Just be prepared for the question for the question and answer session that they're going to ask. Why this now? Why didn't you do it first? And just be honest and tell them. But make sure that you're clear and concise. You do not want to ramble. When you start rambling, like the first hypothetical, I believe it's connected to fetal cells. I mean, it just opens up to more questions that they could potentially ask. And depending on your company, if they want to make an example out of you, they can go that route. But most companies who are just trying to deny it, and they'll go to the undue hardship. So it's just easier for them to deal with, which I'm sure 90% of them will attack because this is not sincerely. That's a very high hurdle for them to jump. And it's just a pain. So just be prepared for that. And after that, we can go ahead. They're about to wrap up, and then we can finish.
So we'll just sum up here quickly what we've covered, and then we'll try to answer. We've had a lot of questions come in, so which isn't surprising, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. If we aren't able to follow up with you, or we aren't able to get to your question live here, we can follow up with you via email. We're happy to take the time to do that. But just some takeaways here is, as I mentioned earlier, document. Have forms. Rely on those forms, have everybody, whether you think the claim is, that the accommodation request is good or not, have everybody follow that process and complete the forms. If you're having conversations with individuals, take notes and make note of that afterwards, so you can refer to that later. And as we've said, it's okay to ask reasonable questions if there's an objective reason for questioning the sincerity of the belief. And someone asked where that comes from, and that's EEOC guidance that basically has those objective factors that set those forward in case law. So it's developed, but it's in the EEOC guidance on religious accommodations. It's not necessarily in the context of vaccines, but just accommodations in general for religious requests. And, I think here the only thing to note is if you go too far with asking about the sincerity of the belief, one, you risk hacking off your employees, which you probably don't want to do. And two, you can really kind of then go into like harassment territory, right? If you're, doing all kinds of, research and private investigating and whatever to question the belief, that could be, turn into religious harassment at some point. So the other thing to note is, the undue hardship analysis is an interactive process. You have to have a dialogue with the employee. It's much better to end up denying a request after you've had a conversation with the employee. I've had a lot of companies or clients reach out and say, well, we're going to deny the accommodation. And it's like, well, what are they asking for? But, specifically, what are they asking for, to be exempt from the policy? And they don't know. They haven't had that conversation. So have those conversations, figure it out, and to see if it's going to be an undue hardship. And that could change over time. I know we had several questions say, well, we granted accommodations at some point, but then we need to deny them or vice versa. Totally fine. You're not locked in indefinitely in granting these types of exceptions. Facts change. People decide to get vaccinated. People decide, not to get a booster. Maybe after the first of the year, being vaccinated won't be as big of a deal anymore. We just don't know. Facts change, so you're not locked in to this. If you have two people make an accommodation request and you can handle it, it's not an undue hardship at that point, fine. But then if you have a week later, 55 people make an accommodation request, and that then poses an undue hardship, it's fine to be to change the analysis. The facts underlying the analysis have changed. And then, of course, we just would say consult with an employment attorney to create these forms, to create the standard process, for a second set of eyes when you're getting these requests. We see a lot of them, and so we kind of have an idea of, what may be reasonable, what may be not. And we can help you with that. But it's important to have someone kind of guiding you through this process, because as Michael pointed out, I think it's right for people to bring claims because it is such a sensitive subject. Okay, so with that, I'll look at some of the questions. Let's see. Michael, I'll send this one to you. If an employer has more than 100 employees, should the employer wait until OSHA issues its anticipated guidance before granting or denying a religious accommodation exemption from the mandatory vaccine requirement?
Before I answer the question, it's important to remember that, we've been talking mostly about federal law in this presentation, but various state laws might apply. Texas governor recently passed an executive order. Florida's thinking about a similar executive order outlawing mandatory policies. So just keep that in mind. In terms of the specific question, assuming it's not prohibited by state law, employers don't necessarily have to wait until the OSHA ETS comes out. It can, it cannot. But at the end of the day, we don't expect the ETS to conflict with an employer's decision whether or not to provide a religious accommodation exemption. In other words, we expect the ETS to include that as a potential carve-out, along with disabilities.
So another question, thank you, Michael. Another question has come in that says, I have seen employee requests indicating they are opposed to the COVID vaccine because their body is a temple and they don't believe in injecting their bodies with foreign substances. This is common. We've seen that one a lot too. However, the employee has also previously received flu vaccines in a healthcare setting. The employee indicates that not enough research was done on the COVID vaccines. This seems to be a non-religious belief and not sincerely held. Thoughts? Okay, so I'll chime in real quick here, just for time purposes. I would say if you have knowledge that the employee has received a flu vaccine before, which I would say is inconsistent with the religious belief they're asserting now that their body is a temple and they don't want to inject a foreign substance, that's a reason, an objective basis to ask for more information. Maybe since the flu vaccine has been developed, or since they got the flu vaccine, the religious beliefs have changed. I think that, the question about the vaccine not being tested, it is more of a personal belief and not as much of a religious basis. So I think it's tough, but I think kind of seeing that inconsistency gives you the reason, or gives you a basis for asking for more follow-up information so you can flesh that out a little bit more on the form, so you have it in one place. Let's see. This is a good one. Michael or Abby, can you take this one? It says, must applicants or candidates who are seeking employment be offered religious accommodations to vaccine requirements?
So I would say that the short answer to that is yes. And so if you have a job that being there in person is an essential function of that job, you'd want to make sure that you describe the job that way in your external postings. But you would still need to accommodate any applicants. That wouldn't mean that they would have to be able to do an in-person job from home, but that might mean you'd have to give them other accommodations like masking and testing, et cetera, that we've talked about here. But it applies for current employees and expectant employees as well.
And some applicants, real quick, to the extent you want to ask the vaccination question, we would recommend it would be after a conditional offer of employment has been given, as opposed to a preliminary screening question. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, so I think with that, I know we're...
Okay, so it wraps up. But that last question was, what if, them being in person is an essential part of the job? Would you still approve of accommodations? And that depends. If it's, them or us being physically there, for instance, like a waiter, you can't, you can't work from home being a waiter at a restaurant, but the accommodation would be, mask or weekly testing, things like that. So That ends the training, the video. Really quick, let me post this. I meant to post this earlier. 1 second. Let me see if I can pin this link. If not, if it won't pin, I'll put it in the chat anyway. I did. This is a template that I used for my religious exemption request or my essay. This is good. Read it. Don't just copy out some of the key points. Find the we say they have the Jewish section in there or the Christian section, and just start copying and pasting without reading it. Read it. He tells you how to draft it. But in addition to that, you want to make sure that in the language of your request, for one, it needs to be written. Don't do anything oral. In your request, um, um, make sure that you put, sincerely held religious belief, and make sure you put it when you're discussing the accommodation that you're requesting. Make sure you put, or as you describe it, make sure that you say it's not an undue hardship. That's not just because you say it. It's not a magic word that says, "Oh, they said it." No, they're still going to do their assessment on their end to say actually it is so or it's not. So make sure those languages in there. I think I know the undue hardship is in there when it talks about the accommodation, but make sure that that is in there. I've seen some. I've seen a um, a exemption request. I've seen one that I'm not trying to get on this. I don't want to get on this person, but I just want to read this one part that they put. And I would if you're using something you found offline, and this language is in there. They use some precepts in here, which is good. They put some state law in here. That's not necessary. You put a Senate bill in here. The thing like that here's the thing with the request. If you don't understand 100% what's in this request, I wouldn't put that language in there. You taking out that language is not it's not going to make your request weaker or stronger with that language in there. So if it's in there, you just put it in there because it sounds, it's got some legal buzzwords, it's got some, law in there, but you don't know what they're talking about or what some of those legal terms are. I would delete it. So the request in of itself is covered under the Constitution, Title VII. So by you just making a request, it can be something as, I'm a Catholic, I don't believe it. I don't believe in the vaccines, the fetal cell. I wouldn't do that. Just, you want to flesh it out and make it, very articulate. But I'm saying something as basic as that will get Title VII protection. And then they would go into the other analysis. So the company is going to engage you because they want a track record to say, hey, we engaged all these employees. Some companies who do not know what they're doing will probably just deny it. But that's probably why, that's why you want to be proactive and to say, this is, these are the precepts I'm using. This is the accommodation I'm requesting, and it is not an undue hardship on the company. So you want to get ahead of that so they can, versus saying, oh, it's undue hardship, but no one knows what the accommodation request was. You didn't put it in there. They didn't say, hey, are you willing to do this? Neither one of you had that in your conversation, but having that in there is a good idea. So if you don't understand 100% what's in your request, I would take the language out. Because they may ask you, oh, so you quoted the Senate bill. Do you know that also in the Senate bill, it's, they got some shit in there that you never read, but they're opening the door to say, oh, this is not sincerely or, whatever. So I would just take it out. And then there's some other language in here now, non-assumpted without prejudice. I would take that out if you don't know what it means. It doesn't make it weaker or stronger. I mean, if you want to say, by me filling this out, I do not waive any of my rights under law. It's kind of, it's not, that doesn't say, oh, you applied for religious exemption, you got denied, Therefore, you waived any rights to a lawsuit that doesn't exist. So I would take that out. And the reason why I'm saying this, and this is the one key point I would definitely take out. Again, people, we most of us, are not employment lawyers. We don't know how to draft things. We're kind of just, we're doing the best we can with knowledge we have based on, what we think is right, Google, things like that, leaning on the Most High. So not faulting anyone for this. I'm showing you the potential traps that it could lead. This one says, furthermore, your choice to deny my request for religious exemption, you are manifesting and showing by the fruits you bear that you, in capital letters, are a certain to Satan and not the Lord of the true living God. I would remove that. That has nothing to do with the request that you're requesting. So, I mean, as an employer, put yourself in an employer's shoes. You're reading this and saying, okay, if I deny it, I'm Satan or I'm a servant of Satan. But if I grant it, I'm serving the Lord. But if I, down the line, if I say she has to work or he has to work on, extra hours, am I now Satan? It creates a distraction. And so also in here, I do not see a what specific request are you requesting? What is the accommodation? I request to work from home. My accommodation is to wear a mask. That would keep everyone safe. That's not de minimis. That's not undue hardship on the company. I can do my work. It doesn't impede on the rights and benefits of my colleagues. That's what you're requesting. The precepts in here are good. That's personal interpretation, so no one's going to attack your precepts. But what is your accommodation that you're requesting? That needs to be in here, in this whatever you're drafting. This one that I'm just kind of looking over. I would delete a lot of this stuff. The precepts are good, but a lot of this language I would delete. Saying if you don't keep me employed, you're a servant of Satan. That creates a distraction. It has nothing to do with the vaccine. It has nothing to do with the accommodation that you're requesting. It has nothing to do with neither one. So I would just delete it. I mean, it doesn't help you. It definitely doesn't help you in your, exemption request. So, and any legal language you do not understand, like you cannot explain this to so and so, or you cannot explain. If someone says, "What does this mean?" If you cannot explain it, delete it. And that's one thing a lot of people get tripped up in. They see some standard language in a contract, and when they get in court, the judge is like, "Well, you put this here. You didn't know what this meant." So, um, you know, every word, excuse me, in a legal document, every word matters. Everything. So, with that, really quick. I mean, I know we got some other rooms going on, and people are. So with that, let me go over um, my religious exemption. So theirs was a questionnaire. Okay, so earlier this year or even last year, they were sending emails periodically asking for our vaccination status, which I thought was HIPAA protected, but I guess not. Um, asking, do we plan on getting vaccinated? If we are vaccinated, how many doses? If you have one dose, when is your next scheduled visit? I just ignored them. I didn't. I think the first one I filled out and said I have not gotten the vaccine, and then after that, they said, we will email you every 2 weeks to see if your status has changed. So every 2 weeks they email me. I just started ignoring them. So our last meeting, they said, hey, everyone in the office must be vaccinated by. I think they gave a date. Must be vaccinated. If not, you'll be terminated. So, people were asking questions, which just lets us know the vaccine is full of shit. Someone asked a question: what if everyone is vaccinated and there's a breakout or outbreak? What then? And they were like, oh, well, we'll just isolate those and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, so people are vaccinated and there's still outbreaks, but they just gloss over that. So anyway, my boss's boss, after the meeting, my boss's boss messaged me directly. She called me and said, hey, Leo, I take it you're not taking the vaccine. And I said, no, I'm not. And I was like, well, our department we've been approved from work from home. So why would do I still need to get vaccinated? And she said, yeah, because we might have some meetings and things like that and blah, blah, blah. So, the whole meeting thing. So, she was quiet for like 20 seconds. She didn't say anything. She was just like, yeah, yeah. She's an Edomite. So I said, so what about the religious exemptions? And she was like, oh, that, okay, yeah, yeah. You need to, email HR and blah, blah, blah. They'll have a form. So instead of saying, hey, Leo, you're not getting the vaccine, by the way, that you do your religious exemption, because that's due as well if you're, they don't want to give you any out. Okay. So, um, you know, I contacted HR, instead of HR contacting us, they've been every 2 weeks bugging me, am I, vaccinated? They didn't say anything about no religious exemption. But anyway, so she sent me a questionnaire and I took the one that's pinned here. I took it, I massaged it, I put in my, some additional precepts or, put my own language in there. And then I just plugged it in to the questions. So just, and a lot of the precepts that we would use for this situation, they're in this one as well. But I said, it is my sincerely held religious belief that receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, which is now a requirement for continued employment, goes against my biblical Jewish messianic faith. Okay, and there's a reason I put that. Secondly, and I guess I'll go ahead and explain the reason why I said it the way I said it. I don't want them looking at anything else because the threshold for sincerely held religious belief is extremely high for them to jump. So I don't want them to be distracted with anything else. They may look at Google if I typed in anything different than what I typed in. So prayerfully, you can read between those lines of what I'm talking about. And the persecution that comes with me being more specific than I need it to be. So they know what that means, biblical, Jewish, Masonic faith, messianic faith. And that's all they need to know. They don't need to know anything else. Now, if you want to be more specific, that is your personal choice. But be prepared, possibly be prepared for additional questions. If you can handle those questions or you want to answer those questions, that's not. But again, they're not going to attack it that much because it's a high hurdle to say, oh, they believe this, therefore it's not sincere. No, it's pretty sincere. So, but I don't want to give them any out. So they know what that means, and we need to move on. Secondly, my personal relationship with God and His holy word. I believe in the Torah, and the book of Exodus tells us. And then I quoted Exodus 15:26 and said, if thou will diligently hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God and will do all which is right in his sight and will give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that heals thee. I said this covers the plagues of Egypt as well as plagues not written in the Bible if we do not keep his law, statutes, and commandments. Deuteronomy 28:58 through 61, key verses 6-61. Moreover, he will bring all these diseases of Egypt, which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. Also, every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law, then will the Lord bring upon thee until thou be destroyed. And I said again, speaking as my personal faith regarding the word of God, and I use the word personal faith because it's personal, so they can't, objectively, say it's not sincere, has been a hedge of protection and will continue to do so as I respect his word and his temple. 2 Corinthians 6:9. And then, it's classic when everyone's quoting, what ye know not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God and not your own. And then I quoted some other ones. Now, this is where they tripped me up, and honestly, I did this pretty quickly. I read over it again and it sounded right, but this is where they potentially, they asked some more questions like, what did you mean by this? I said, this vaccination process has been a feeling of anxiety for me, which in of itself goes against which again goes against my belief of letting my anxiety run rampant in my mind. And then I quoted Philippians 4:6-7. Be careful for nothing, and in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And then I quoted Matthew 6:31-34, key verse 34. Take ye therefore no thought for the morrow, and for the morrow shall take thought of the things of itself, sufficient to the day the evil thereof. I said, however, as I meditate on the word of God, I've become more relaxed and continue to be a better husband, son, brother, lawyer. Based on my spiritual interpretations of the word of God, I believe these injections are a defilement of my body and temple of the Most High God. I further believe one addresses the disease by a good mental spirit, obedience to the biblical dietary laws, prayer, and maintaining faith while being obedient to God. I believe that in the Torah that God made man in his image and after his likeness with a fully functioning immune system. Lastly, as above in my explanation of my sincerely held personal religious beliefs, I hope I have described them sufficiently. Again, these thoughts are a unique message I have received from my God. I don't ask you or anyone else to agree with these thoughts in personal translations, but I respectfully request that they be honored as truthful and legally permissible. Based on what I've shared, I ask the religious exemption be approved. I further ask that the request for exemption be kept 100% confidential from my colleagues as it contains thoughts and sentiments not shared in casual conversation and deeply personal to me. And then she asked, that the other parts of the questionnaire was, just questions like describe the specific accommodation you are requesting and how this will help you perform your jobs and duties. So I just go into, hey, we've been working from home for 18 months. Everything's been fine. No complaints. And then in July, before this mandate came in, we've been approved to work from home permanently. So there should, I request that this accommodation be intact. Now, the part about, you got to show up for some meetings every now and again. I'll let them come back and say, well, what about the meetings? Then I'll go into the next steps, mask, testing before I show up, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, that's the meat of it. The rest is just general stuff like what department are you in and blah, blah, blah. So now the part where I talked about anxiety, this is where they, can you give us more information? Okay, so I'll go specific to, and so the follow-up questions were, do you belong to a religious organization? If so, please identify it. I said, I do not belong to any religious organization. And then the part that about the anxiety, they said, it appears your objection to the vaccine is that you believe the process causes you anxiety. And then they quoted what I just said about the vaccination has been giving me a feeling of anxiety. It appears that your objection to the vaccine is that you believe the process causes you anxiety. Can you please elaborate? I said, this is incorrect. Please allow me to clarify. The anxiety that did exist was centered around the mandate from, and I insert the name of the company I work for, stating that to remain employed, one must remain vaccinated. I didn't elaborate. I didn't go into detail. I said, this is the source of the anxiety. I didn't have any anxiety. Well, I didn't have any anxiety regarding this vaccine. But this is the source of it. You guys. Okay. Now, this is another question they're going to ask to possibly trip you up. Have you declined other immunizations in the past, such as flu vaccines, measles, DTaP, varicella, some other stuff I can't pronounce, rotavirus, hepatitis A, shingles, rubella? If so, we will need you to provide a note from your physician, which includes date you began seeing your physician, and that your medical records that reflect you have not received any of those above listed vaccines at their office. I said, I have had my religious beliefs since 2016. Since that time, I have not taken any immunizations, nor have I been required to for travel or employment. Therefore, I do not have any records. And so, there you go. So that was just a rundown. And, this was submitted on the 2nd of November. Still waiting to hear back, what's the next step. So, but that just gives you a rundown of one in action, the questions that they're going to ask back, and the point of view from that training video of what the employers are looking at. Again, the hurdle for is this really a religion? That's a hurdle too high for them to jump over. the undue hardship connected to the accommodation that you are requesting, that's what they're going to use. So just be aware of that. You know, think about it before you submit it. And if you're working at a company and they haven't said anything, oh, you must be vaccinated by such and such and such date, or you will be fired. Contact HR and say, hey, what is the process for providing religious exemptions or us requesting religious exemptions? Ask them that process, because you are assuming by asking that question that they legally have for one, they have a legally obligation to consider it, and two, they should have a process in place for you to go through. Mine was a questionnaire. They may ask you to write an essay. They may ask you to get an affidavit. That's like an essay format. So whatever it is, make sure that you follow up with them, because my company didn't say anything about it until someone asked in the chat about it. They haven't said nothing about it at all. No exemptions, no medical, no religious, until one guy in the chat asked about it, and then I personally asked about it after my manager was quiet for 20 seconds, asking me why didn't I get vaccinated. So they don't want to give you any outs. If they haven't already mentioned it, make sure you mention it. And so with that, if there's anything you brothers want to bring out, I yield. And I appreciate.
No, I
I
mean,
personally, Salakia, I personally don't have anything, but I think that was very thorough. A bunch of just gems that you brought out. Dealing with this process. I know, I had my religious exemption done from a brother that I know. But you kind of like basically broke it down piece by piece for those that don't know, that's probably not in the camp, that don't have access to that. And I think it was, just the information, the background that you was able to, give us, looking through, from a company's perspective of what their angle is, in either accepting or denying it. I think was golden. That's information that normally we don't have, or we got to hear about. We kind of wonder about. But you gave us information that normally we're not privy to. So I thought it was excellent. And yeah, the Water King, definitely the Water.
yeah, Ben kind of covered my sentiments, so it's the water for the breakdowns, and this is valuable information, right? So I suggest the people that tuned in tonight, if this doesn't apply to you or you don't find it applicable, but you have friends, relatives, family members that are, in situations at their place of employment where this is, you know, needs to be addressed, then this is definitely something that you should share. They have the replay feature. Maybe when you're around them, you could come back and play the entire thing so that they can listen. I would definitely recommend that, because our people need these kind of resources and need brothers like Leo that have the professional aptitude to really break this stuff down, and so we could absorb it and it be beneficial toward us, so that we don't have to take this poison, right? So that's all I want to say on it. The water again, Leo, for your insight and this whole experience. Right?
Khan, all praises to the Most High for putting me in this position. It's an
Carl.
Yeah, Khan, I didn't really have anything to add. Great lesson, definitely a lot of great information. I'm probably gonna have to rewind this and watch it myself a couple of times. I missed a couple of things. I was trying to take notes as I went, but yeah, no, great.
Yeah. So for anybody that's trying to find out just about the Salakia, the replay feature, right? So after the room is done, you'll be able to go down in one of the speakers' bio, which will be, anyone that's on stage right now, Brother Mike, Brother Leo, or myself or Azriel, and you'll be able to see the feature, which is you'll see the room basically. Once you click on that room, you can even watch it, and you'll be able to go through the whole process, which is you'll go through the room and be able to see Leo, which did the majority of the speaking through the room, and you'll be able to skip to different points. But should you not want to do that, you could just it'll be I'll go through it right now real quick because I just did it myself just to make sure. So basically, when you go down to the room, and it'll be three dots that you'll see on the room. Instead of clicking to go into the room itself, just tap on the three dots and it'll come up and it'll say delete replay. It'll say download full audio or share replay, right? So if you want to take it off of Clubhouse, you can actually download it and take it to your own computer and go through it piece by piece, or you can watch it on Clubhouse and basically go through it. But when you download it, it'll be just the audio, right? So it won't be no pictures, but you'll have the MP4 source of the room, from start to finish. So that's how you go about getting the the content basically, and that's how it works, which I think is very good. So the only other way to do it would be to if you want to get the video of it, you would have to go through the room to watch it, and then I guess through your Apple device you can screen record, and then you'll have like the PTR and the pins and things like that. So that's how the replay feature works. So you can only watch it on Clubhouse, the full video of the room, and interact with it, or you can download the audio of the room. All right, Leo, did you have anything else before we wrap up?
No, that's it. I appreciate y'all for coming out. I really do. When you all honor and praise to Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. Shout out to the brothers who are helping moderate the room. If you haven't become a member yet, click on the greenhouse, join our Kingdom Come, join our sister clubs, God First Gang, Versus, Crown of Thorns, and One Third Room, and definitely get edified. So that's all I have.
Con. So we pray that y'all have a beautiful rest of the night. And we'll say shalom.
Yeah. In time of trouble, what you gonna do? Yeah. What now? What you gonna do? In time of trouble, yeah. You better not, yeah.